Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Sorry this was a little difficult, but we're back and we're good to go. So I hope everyone's doing well. I know everyone's busy, so um, I hope you're having a good week. But thank you so much for taking time out of your week to join the stream and hopefully learn something new that can prepare you for your test or whatever you're working on in class, and this will be fun. So while we're going, say something in the chat or to ask any questions you might have with any of the I'm going over. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the material. So I'm going to share my information here. But yeah, as I'm going along, there's a question button at the bottom that if you have any questions over the material, you can go ahead and ask there, and I'll get to you as soon as I can. But yeah, that being said, let's go ahead and start. So, okay. Oops. Here we go. So, I will be doing a stream on women and demographic change and how that relates to human geography. If you remember from to population and how that changes. So yeah, we're going to go along those lines. And so at the end, we will be doing a practice FRQ. So stay tuned for that if real practice with a real life Q from the AP exam. So that's something fun to look forward to at the end. Stay tuned over it. But here you go. Before we get started, don't forget to follow Fiveable on Instagram at ThinkFiveable, and go ahead and subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. We have some really great resources for all AP subjects, regardless of which one you're taking. And if you're curious on when the next stream that you want to tune into is happening, then you can go ahead and check, and it has what's going on, some help research for that as well. Okay, so in this stream, I'm going to be talking talk about three main parts that I ended up into. So the first one that we're going to be going over is women and social issues. So we're going to talk about women have experienced changes related to social values and access to value societies such as education, employment, contraceptives, and healthcare. So a lot of those things go hand in hand, and we're just going to be talking about how access to these things have changed over time. And as a result of the change of these things, we're going to be talking about states and those have declined or increased, and also the roles of women in different roles. So talking about the social roles, their political roles, economic, cultural, and just how that's influenced by women's changing and demographics and in just the cultural landscape overall. And then the third thing is Ravenstein's laws. If you remember in one of my past streams, we went over Ravenstein and we talked about him and how his theories about and where he talked about how women do or do not fit into those theories and how it has changed over the past 20 years. Things like that have changed. We're going to be going over that and just how we can see how those Ravenstein's laws and theories of migration kind of align the social and economic roles of women in society. That being said, let me just this is important. So you're probably wondering, why we need to learn about things like this with women's roles in demographics. The first, it's always changing. So women's roles are constantly changing, even over the past decade. It's changed. If you look at graphs that show changes of fertility rates, which we will talk about later, migration, all changed. And so it's important to have understanding of the past trends in order to see and that's changed, because it not only just affects women, but it affects the entire population. It affects children, it affects men. Their cultural landscape is affected by women's roles in society and how fertility rates and mortality rates. And we're also, it helps geographers predict population growth. So by looking at the trends that this data might, fertility rates have decreased, you may predict that, well, maybe they'll continue to decrease in the future, which we'll talk about as well. And it's education, it allows geographers to kind of get a better understanding and be able to better plan for the future by studying this stuff. That being said, we're going to jump into fertility rates. This is a really important concept to understand while going through this and understanding it, mainly because it's a excuse me, fertility rate around this kind of centers around it, around this data. So when we collect data about fertility rates, it's kind of important to we're going to this. But so what is it? Fertility rates refer to the average number of births in a city, and we use it to find just how many children a woman will have during her childbearing years, which in geography we refer to as 15 to 49. So it's around the age a woman starts having children and is done having children. So between those ages, they'll look at the average number of births that a woman will have. So worldwide, the number is usually between 2 and 4. Higher than 4 is considered a pretty high number of children, and then lower than 2 is pretty low for a woman to have. But if you look at worldwide, there's a lot of disparity amongst the countries. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia, any lesser developed country, the amount of children that a woman may have can be 5 or more. In Europe, this number may be 2 or less. So it really differs just based on where the person is located. So if everyone's good on that, I'm going to move on to social values. So are there any questions about fertility rates or anything like this? It's kind of important that you have a good understanding and grasp this well moving forward. All right, if we're all good, I'm going to go ahead and move on to social values. So we're going to talk about how the societal role of women has changed. So we're going to be talking about 4 things. The first 2 are education and employment, which are kind of related, and healthcare and contraceptives. So both of these things, they're kind of grouped together and they kind of relate to each other, as a lot of things in human do. But these are specifically values in society, things that we value that has changed a lot concerning women and things like that. So, excuse me. So obviously a wealthier economy would have more money to spend on things like education and healthcare. They'll have more funds allocated to improving this, and this has allowed for a decrease in fertility by having better education, more schooling for women, and better healthcare for them. And we'll look at how fertility rates may go down and how there may not be as many children being born because of these factors. And also these things, looking at things like education, healthcare, employment, they not only help women, but when there's a better quality of them, then it improves quality of life for the whole family. The kids, the any males in the so the entire family benefits from improving the state of women within these categories. So the first one is education. So why is it so important that we focus or that we allow equal access to education for women, or not just women, people in general? So when more women and remain in school for longer periods of time, then they have more economic control over their lives. Meaning, if a woman stays in school and goes to college or high school or past that, they have more of an opportunity to, or more opportunity to decide a job that they want, that they may receive more money, or they just have more control over that aspect of their lives. By being educated, they're able to determine, and they have more of what they want and going on with that. Better education also helps women to understand reproduction rights and able to choose contraceptives and able to make informed choices about birth control. So from this, fertility rates may decrease, which is something else we'll talk about. And could you do a quick recap when you finish this section? Yeah, of course. Okay. Yeah, let me just get past. We're talking about societal values right now and how this relates to women and things like that. We just started this section, so let me know if you have any questions as we go along. Thanks for tuning in. But yeah, this picture right here shows women in a small town in India, and they're being educated, which is very good because they're able to understand their reproductive rights, and they're able to make informed decisions about not only their health, but their reproductive rights, and be able to make more informed decisions about that. So that's really good for the society as a whole. All of the community benefits from these types of things. And I analyze graph because it's a pretty good tool to have for human geography. If you haven't already, you'll be looking at a lot of different graphs and conclusions from this. So if we look at the dark blue bars right here, we see that this describes the number of adults, so adults that haven't had education in reading or writing. So over the years, with the exception of 1990, it has been going down, as we can see here. From 1950 to 2015, the number has definitely decreased. And the adult literacy rate has gone up, which you can see a little bit more, which is very, very good, because if you look at this light blue line that's increasing here, we can see that back in the 1950s through 1990s even, the number of adults that could read and write was significantly lower than the number of adults that couldn't read, which wasn't necessarily good for society. But as we go on, this number has increased, and it's gone past the darker blue bars that we see, meaning that there are more adults worldwide in society that can read than can't. So that's awesome for as a whole, because obviously women are educated, and we talked about how important education was with these types of things. Okay, if you're good on that, I know that was kind of a lot of information that I just threw at y'all. If you have any questions, again, for those of you who just joined, feel free to say anything down in the comments or in the question box, and I will answer those as soon as possible. Okay, so moving on to employment. So this goes hand in hand with education. I kind of touched on this a little, but as we know, being educated allows women to have greater economic control, and part of this is getting jobs and being employed. So this image here shows women in the eastern of Southern Africa. So looking here, these women are working specifically in agriculture, which is of lesser developed countries, a lot of women and just people in general will work in agriculture more so than services or manufacturing, which you may see in more developed countries. So I just want to touch on a term really quickly here, and that term is female labor force participation. And this word, it's kind of long, but if we break it down, it basically just refers to the percentage of women who hold full-time jobs outside of home. So worldwide, 49% of women have full-time jobs outside of their homes, and 75% of men work outside of their home. So a little less than half of women and about 3/4 of men. So it's a pretty large gap, and that's worldwide. But if we look in different regions of the world, then there may be a larger gap. So if we look at South and Southwest Asia or in North Africa, these regions will have larger gaps, larger disparity between the percentage of women and percentage of men that work outside the home. But then if we look at regions or countries in East Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa, these countries may have smaller gaps because many women work in agriculture. So the number of women that work may be closer to the number of men. And even though these regions have higher fertility rates, unfortunately, many women do work in agriculture. So that is something to pay attention to here as we go through this. Everyone's good to move on to healthcare. So a lot of things, or whenever a country implements policies for specifically lesser developed countries, they'll focus on a couple things. So they'll focus on pre and postnatal care. Basically, while a woman is pregnant, is carrying a child, and afterward. And they'll focus on the well-being of the mother while she's carrying that child to ensure that that pregnancy is safe and is successful and that the child is born healthy. And also child immunizations. Something also focus on just to make sure that the child is healthy and to ensure that that child is able to grow up. And again, if the child is a female, then to continue the cycle and to continue the reproduction in society. So that's something that is important. But when we focus on these things, then the number of infant deaths decrease. We call this infant mortality rate, which we'll go into more detail later, just about how different factors will affect the infant mortality rate and also maternal mortality rate, which refers to the death of a mother of the children in society. And when infant survival increases, women may make effective choices in their family planning, and they may have more opportunity to be educated. And as we saw, this affects family planning because it allows for women to make more informed decisions about this. Okay, if I'm looking at the comments here. What stage of the demographic transition model do you think this country is in? It seems that there is still a dependence on primary jobs such as agriculture, but the fact that these women are working together and aren't isolated in their own houses seems like progress. Good observation. I think you're referring to the picture on this one. Thank you, Abby. But okay, yeah. So the demographic transition model will definitely not yet be on 3, where we see a lot of out-migration, or it's probably on one of the lower states because we see, yes, agriculture, but they're working together and aren't isolated in their own houses. Yeah, so it's definitely improvement, but the fact that the women are still working in agriculture, the fact that agriculture is still a big focus and that physical labor kind of not as developed as other countries, because there's still a large focus on agriculture and manual. You see not a lot of machines or not a lot of, just things like that to aid in the labor, the cultural labor that these women are participating in. I hope that answers your question. Or do you think they're still in the early development stage? And might. Yeah, so in a lot of lesser developed countries, as in this is the Eastern Cape, which is like a small town in Southern Africa. Yeah, so men would also be working in manual labor, such as in agriculture, but yeah, this just goes to show how women, I mean, they're not in an office or in a factory, which would show more development. So that's just, yeah, something to pay attention to there. But great observation. That's a great question. Okay, so if I go on to, we're on healthcare. So as I said, when infant survival increases, women make more effective choices. This is partially because, as I was just talking about, women a lot of times, or families, need to have more children because there's an agricultural business. So families may choose to have more children to support the family, and that's considered good because they need more children to work and to continue the family. But when infant survival increases, then we obviously don't need to have as many children because there's more of a chance that child will survive and will be able to work or help family out. So moving on to contraceptives, which relates directly to family planning. So understand this, I kind of touched on this, but I just want to ask you, what challenges might women in developing countries face when trying to access contraceptives? So anything you can do, go ahead and drop that in the comments. I just want to know what you guys think, and this kind of is a quick check-in for if you understand what we're going over. So how do you think that women in developing countries may face challenges when they're trying to birth control or family planning or anything like that? So yeah, drop that in the comments. We'll go over that and we'll discuss this. It's really helpful for when you're reading or going over material to kind of ask yourselves these questions. So yes, I understand that contraceptives are effective in family planning, but what might be a challenge to achieving this? Because obviously not everyone in all parts of the world can access these things. Is it possible there's a cultural boundary or a stereotype? Yeah, awesome. Definitely, there might be a religious or a cultural restriction. Some religions just the use of contraceptives or different things like that, or they may have to use a different method of family planning because their culture restricts that type of the use of these things. And also specifically in developing countries, they're available. So that would definitely be a factor that might hinder access to these contraceptives. So yeah, awesome. Also accessibility. Awesome. Great, Abby. You're really on it. Thank you so much. But yeah, cool. So I think we're done that. I'm going to show you guys this kind of image here, which kind of shows the unmet need for family planning. So if we look here, it's good because this was taken in 2015. If we look all the way down at the bottom of this graph at the world, we see that there, in the blue here, that this describes the and there are way more people that use contraceptives than there are that have an unmet need. So this shows that the world is pretty good about meeting these needs for contraceptives, although we still do see orange over here on the right side that shows that not all the needs are being met, which is definitely something to consider. Okay, so going on with that, I'm going to talk about pronatalist and antinatalist policies. So pronatalist, as you might expect, refers to countries that want a higher birth rate. So they may implement policies that support a higher birth rate or encourage fertility and reproduction because maybe their population is low or declining or something like that. And anti-natalist is just the opposite. So they may encourage family planning as a result of a huge population growth. An example here would be in the 1980s, you may have heard of this, China adopted an anti-natalist policy as a way to curb their population growth. And this was called the one-child policy. So basically, they limited families to having one child because their population was growing exponentially fast, and they needed to curb this by kind of limiting the amount of children that families were having. But then their population dipped too low, so they had to implement pro-natalist policies and restore it because women were, like, everyone was having just one child, and as you might expect, that wasn't enough to replace their population, so they ended up needing to back up and implement pro-natalist policies to bring that back up. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about is excuse me, Rabenstein's laws. So we're going to talk about how, remember from one of my past streams about migration, I talked about Rabenstein. So basically this guy time ago that came up with theories about the way people migrate and the reasons for this and the age and gender of people that are migrating. So before we go on with that, I just want to make sure, is everyone good with these societal values that I talked about here? Are there any questions about what we talked about? Went over education, contraceptives. Is everyone good on that? I'll give you a sec here to answer, but if we're all good, I'll move into Rabenstein laws. Here, let me look at this question. What about China? Can you talk about family planning and what might happen if a country had too much family planning and jeopardized the population? Yeah, so as I was talking about, they ended up implementing that policy, but when the population dipped too low, they ended up having to backpedal and kind of implement pro-natalist policies in order to fix that question of it. Okay, so if everyone's all good, yeah, all right, so Rabenstein's laws. So Rabenstein had a bunch of laws. I think there are 11 of them, but the one that specifically about women and population is this one. So Rabenstein said males were more likely than females to migrate long distance to find work. So this was true for much of the 19th and 20th centuries when Rabenstein came up with his theories, because searching for work was a large driving factor in migration, and males were more likely than females to be employed. As we know, the amount of females that had jobs was a lot lower than the number of males that were active in this. But so yeah, if we look at the 19th and 20th centuries, there were a lot more males than females traveling to find work. But recently, or around the 1970s, which is still fairly recent, female migrants, especially to the United States, have begun to outnumber males. So they account for about 55% of migrants. To the United States, there are about more than of migrants are female. And even in developing countries, percentage of female migrants have increased. Like in Asia, about half of the migrants there are females. And does anyone know why this might be? Why there might be more females than males? I see a question here. What is a ghetto? This refers to the Holocaust and the migration with that. If you want, I can do a stream where we talk about that and but I will go over that in another stream. Thanks for tuning in, though. So if we look at, so Rabenstein's laws with migration for that. So the reason that there are beginning to be more female migrants than male migrants in countries are because, especially in developed countries, there are already a lot of women in the workforce. For example, in the United States or Europe, we see that there are, since past decade or so, or not even decade, the past century, there has been a large increase of women that have begun working and are in the workforce. And so when people migrate for job opportunities, because as we know, money and seeking jobs is a huge driving force in migration. Migrate, these countries are very attracted to women looking for migration because they see, oh, there's a large population of women in the workforce, so that's to go get a job. And so that's a factor that Rabenstein didn't consider when he was coming up with his theory, because that wasn't something that was the case. So yeah, as people migrate, when they look for jobs, they see that women are already in the workforce, so they choose to move there. And then also another factor that kind of makes Rabenstein, or that kind of is different from Rabenstein's theory, is that developed countries have made it possible for wives to join their husbands. So yes, there was a huge amount of during Rabenstein's time period, but since developed countries have made it more possible for women to join their husbands in the country that migrated to, then there have been more female migrants migrating. So yeah, that's something that was kind of important to consider there. Is everyone good? I'm going to move on from Rabenstein. Are there any questions about what his theory was or how it's different today? But yeah, if you go and watch another stream that I go a little bit more into detail about all of Rabenstein's laws, but for now we're just going to focus on this one that's relating specifically to females. But if we're all good, I'm going to continue here. Okay, looks like we're good. Alrighty, so